receive and uphold it, and I vow to fathom that the Tathagata's true meaning. All right, this is where we are in the Amida Sutra, the nadir direction, and we've been talking about the last Buddha, which is the renowned Buddha, and now we're going to be talking about the name light Buddha. Now, according to Master Chin Kong, a name light Buddha represents upholding the Buddha name recitations or Buddha mindfulness. We are mindful of the Buddha, his qualities, his names, because his name represents his qualities. And of course, this is an important approach in the Pure Land method, because by being mindful of the Buddha, that we can achieve concentration, and we are resonating with the Amitabha's 48 great vows, and that provides the conditions for us to migrate to the Western Pure Land, where we can continue our cultivations. And one major component in this practice, and in order to resonate with the Buddha, there needs to be reverence, respect for the Buddha. And so it helps us to understand what that means and why it is important for us to have reverence, respect for the Buddha. Because by having this reverence, that it is like a bridge that allows us to connect with the Buddha and to appreciate his qualities. Today's talk will focus on reverence for Buddhas. Now, reverence for Buddhas, this is the fundamentals of all merits. We have respect, we have not only emotionally, but through wisdom, that we have respect and reverence for all Buddhas. And in order to make this really tangible, because we have not seen Buddha, so it's very hard for us to have that respect. We've never seen the Buddha and let alone Amitabha. And so a more tangible way is to refer to our historical Shakyamuni Buddha, which we have some tangibility, some connections there through history. And it is the foundation of all merits, because without reverence for the Buddhas, all the merits that we cultivate, no matter how much merit we cultivate, it will not be stable. For example, when we learn about compassion, and without a strong foundation of merits, it will be very difficult for us to put into practice, because we can have loving kindness towards those who can reciprocate that, who can love us back, who can respect us. But when it comes to those who disagree with us, those who argue with us, those who we don't like very much, in other words, who don't reciprocate that loving kindness, then it is very difficult for us to exercise the loving kindness. And because not everybody will be nice to us, right? So in order for us to be successful, it has to be unlimited. You can't just say, I'm going to have only loving kindness towards people that I like. That's not Buddhism. Buddhism is universal, and this loving kindness is applicable to all. So until we have this loving kindness towards everybody, including those who hate us, until so, we cannot claim success. And of course, sometimes it's easy for us to react emotionally to slanders, to criticisms, or even abusive language. And for those who have cultivation, have a strong foundation of merits, they can overcome those negativities, the abusive language, the criticisms. But for those who encounter conflicts and they don't have a strong foundation of merit, they tend to forget about compassion altogether, and they react emotionally. And the reasons that they are not successful and they have forgotten whatever they learned, it is because the foundation of merit is not firm enough. So like the old saying, if we want to be like the Buddha, we have to respect the Buddha. And this is why it is important to have reverence. And the Buddha here means he represents greatness. So we're not idolizing a particular figure, begging for mercy. That's not what I'm talking about. But this comes from our heart where we resonate with the ideal, the greatness, something that the Buddha represents, that we resonate with. And that's why we have this respect and this love for this greatness. And to be successful in anything that we do, we have to have passion and the love and respect for it. Otherwise, we will not be able to maintain our interest. So Buddhahood here represents the ultimate wisdoms and merits. And of course, the Buddha represents one of the three jewels, right? And he represents aspiration for greatness. And that's what we're trying to uncover ourselves, is through that bridge, our own greatness, by having reverence, having respect for greatness, which is the Buddha. Shakyamuni Buddha not only represents the Buddha Jew, but really, if you look at him, he is a living ideal reality, and he represents the three Jews: the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. Because he himself has achieved enlightenment, therefore he's the Buddha. He represents Buddhahood, and he expounds the Dhamma, and that's Dhamma, and he himself is among part of the Sangha, therefore he represents the Sangha. So when we say we have reverence for something great and beneficial for all sentient beings, we are growing the root of merit and wisdom. And when we can increase our level of reverence for greatness, Buddhahood, then we are increasing our level of cultivation. And until one day we have absolute reverence for the Buddha, for greatness, then we ourselves will become Buddhas. So the more respect that we have for the Buddha, the easier that we will be able to achieve sagehood, entering that gate of Buddhahood. For example, in the Dhamma Sutra, there is a story about Samana, the florist. Samana was a florist, and every day he would bring flowers, jasmine flowers, to King Babisara. And on his way to offering flowers to the king, he saw the Buddha, who was on his out and about on alms giving. And he saw this Buddha, the body of the Buddha was radiating in light and aura, that he felt so compelled to offer the Buddha the flowers that he was bringing to the king. So he felt such a strong desire to offer his flowers to the Buddha, and of course that would risk him of being exiled or even killed by the king, because he did not follow through with the command that the king has issued. But he felt such a strong desire, that gravitational pull, if you will, that allowed him to overcome his fear. And he said that even if the king were to drive him out of the country or to kill him, he would not offer the flowers to the king that day, but instead he would offer the flowers to Shakyamuni Buddha. And of course, when the Buddha went out for alms round, thousands of people came out to pay their respect to the Buddhas. And for Samana, his entire body was suffused with delight, satisfaction. This joy, this wonderful joy that he encountered, because of his encounters with the Buddha, and his faith, his overcoming of fear that allows him to have this joy. Now, in our lives, imagine that you are financially independent, you are emotionally independent, you are on top of the world, there is no fear in you. It gives us great joy to know that There is nothing that can make you fear, and you don't even have fear of death. And that's what Samana had in his mind, was he was able to overcome his fear of being exiled or killed by the king. I mean, there isn't any greater fear than the fear of death. So if you can overcome the fear of death, then you have conquered all fears, right? The greatest fear is the fear of death. So because of that he has overcome his fear of death, that he feels the delightfulness in him. And of course, the king was not upset, because the king had already achieved Sotapanna, which is the stream entrant. Right? He already had entered sagehood. And so he himself was happy about Samana offering his flower. There was no jealousy in him. There was no, say, how dare you, why do you choose the Buddha over me? Why did you respect me? He didn't have this. Remember, one of the criteria is self-view, right? He didn't have this self-personality attachment to it. Of course, he was very happy that Samana was making the offering, because his wife, Samana's wife, told the king that, hey, it's not my fault that you have no flowers today. So the king came out to say, okay, well, I understand the situation now. So him too came out to make offerings to the Buddha. And after that, he sent for the florist and asked him, what did you say when you honored the Buddha? Samana says, Your Majesty, I surrender my life to him. Honor him, saying, the king may kill me or banish me from his kingdom. The king said, you are a great man. And so saying, he presented him with great elephants, great horses, and all these gifts. So when he said, I surrender my life to him and honor him, he is surrendering his life to something great, because he saw what the Buddha represented. And so Ananda, having witnessed this event, asked the Buddha, well, what will be the reward of this florist who made offering, who had overcome his fear and made offering of flowers to you? And so the Buddha says, he surrendered his life to me, render honor to me. He had immense faith in me. He will not enter a state of suffering and will receive the fruits of his good deeds in the world of the gods and in the world of man. And eventually, he will become solitary Buddha Samana. So when the Buddha says, surrender his life to me, don't think that the Buddha was very arrogant to have somebody who would die for him. But me here, because he has no self, me here means Tathagatas, right? The true nature. He sometimes refers to himself as Tathagatas, the true nature. So because he has no self, and so there was no self-attachment in that statement. But Samana, that we should understand here, that Samana was making decisions whether to continue to live in fear or to follow a path of greatness. And when Samana has made decisions to follow the path of greatness, it reinforced his faith. And because of his faith, that allows him to have reverence for the Buddhas. And that was his foundations of merit and wisdom. Because with strong foundation of merit and wisdom, there is no fear. And because of merits and wisdom, there is no way for him to ever encounter suffering. So it was not like it was an exchange, right? Where there was, okay, you respect me, you commit your life to me, and I will protect you. That was not what was going on. Samana was making an offering of flowers to Buddha out of reverence, not out of fear, right? Not out of fear that he was gonna be suffering in a lower realm, but it was out of reverence, right? Can you tell the difference? That one is you're showing respect to somebody, not because out of fear, not because out of wish that you get something from them, but because you love and you respect them so much that you're willing to do everything that you can for that person, because that person will bring even more benefits, greatness to society, to others. So Tamana surrendering his life to the Buddha, and as a result, he himself would enjoy the great fruits of his merit cultivation and eventually become a Buddha. That was not an exchange. That was not like a Buddha would guarantee such and such, but it was all his own effort. And because of that he has great faith, and that led him to have reverence, and that led him to build a strong foundation of merit and wisdom. And how do we know that this was not blind faith when he committed his life to the Buddha? Any comments? What can we take from this story that you think that it was not blind faith? Because, I mean, when we read this, right, he surrendered his life to me. That sounds very religious, right? That sounds that there might be fear in it, but so how do we know from based on this story? What do you think? How do we know that Samana did not have blind faith? What do you think? What do you think, Alex?
No, I'm thinking he just thought he saw the light, he saw the glow in the Buddha. He said there was no confusion there.
So he saw something with his eyes, right? But we know this is not blind faith. In my opinion, when I read this story, that there are three reasons why where I believe this is not blind faith, even though he's saying he's committing himself to something. One is because there is no fear. There's no fear in him. If he has fear, then he will not make that offerings to the Buddha, because he knows that by doing so, he could be exiled and he will be killed by the king. And so if there was fear in him, he wouldn't have done that, right? So one, there's no fear. So in other words, his offering of flowers to the Buddha was truly a sincere reverence, true respect for the Buddha. So secondly, he did not offer the flowers to the Buddha to reap the benefits, future karmic rewards. He didn't ask the Buddha to be born in the worlds of gods and men to enjoy the good fruits of his good deeds, right? And thirdly, as we can see here, that he will become a Buddha himself. So meaning that the actions that he's taking is leading him to enlightenment. So there's no confusion, there's no superstition. It's very clear. If you're going to be enlightened, that means you have a clear state of mind. So we know that when he surrendered his life to the Buddha, he was surrendering his life to greatness, reverence, and that's why it is not blind faith. And so we can see that from having reverence for the Buddha, and in this case, Samana, by just having reverence for the Buddha, he opened the door to sagehood, right? As a result, he was laying a strong foundation for his spiritual development, and eventually it would lead him to becoming a Buddha himself. This story here is telling us that reverence for the Buddha is really important, because it is helping us to lay a strong foundation for our merit and wisdom cultivation, right? And a person who is truly meritorious and virtuous, his actions are real and his intentions are real. In other words, his thoughts, words, and actions are consistent and they are true to themselves. So Samana he didn't say, oh, I respect the Buddha, how great the Buddha Yes. But he actually took action. Right? He took action. He made offerings of the flowers to the Buddha. So whatever that he was feeling in his heart, he was following through. He didn't just think about it, but he said it, and he did it. And so that is a strong foundation. That's true merit and wisdom. And so what we learn about this is that it's helping us to understand why it is so important to have reverence for the Buddha. And when we bow to the Buddha, we should have the same positive emotions, if you will, the compassion, the reverence for the Buddha, for he is so wise, so compassionate to all sentient beings, and he represents greatness, who brings benefits to all sentient beings. And that's why we revere him, is because of what he represents, right? Because without merits and virtues, then the kindness kindness is just an empty shell. There's nothing in it. But if it comes from our heart to have this reverence, this respect for the Buddha because we feel it, then our words and actions mean something. Does that make sense? Right. Of course, it's very difficult to judge on the outside what is good and what is bad. And life is not always straightforward, right? And we sometimes have to go behind the scene, behind the words that people say. People may say, thank you, but they may not mean it. People may say, oh, you are great, but they may not mean it. Even people give you a strange stare or even don't even say hello to you. It does not mean that they are unkind to you. They may be teaching you something. And that could be our guru, could be a teacher to help us to eliminate our self-attachment. Somebody who may not compliment us may be a good teacher. So so we cannot judge on the surface of what is good and what is bad. And in Lao Fan's 4 lessons, there was a master, Zhong Feng. He was asked, what is the standard for good and bad? And of course, there were people was trying to answer, well, good is when you compliment somebody, and then the master say, well, not necessarily. Or say, good is when you praise somebody, you pat the back, you give them gifts. Buddha and the master say, not necessarily so. And even of a bad, if you yell at somebody, that doesn't mean it's bad, right? So his definition of what is good is when we do things for the benefits of others, and that is good. So even if we yell at somebody, like a child, but we do it out of love, of trying to help foster the child to grow to become a good citizen, so that that child can recognize the faults and will correct his way to become a good contributing citizen. So even that scolding is good, right? Or if a parent pampers the child, always buys toys, on the surface may look like that the parent is loving the child, but in reality, the parent is actually hurting the child by pampering the child. Good or bad is you cannot make determination based on the surface, just on the surface. But what is good here is that when we bring benefits, when we help that person grow, when we help develop that person to become a good person, to avoid suffering, then that is good. But bad is when we do things for self-benefiting. For example, we compliment somebody, but out of, we want something in return. So that behind that compliment is really about ourselves. We compliment somebody because we want something from it. And so even though it sounds good, but it's actually bad. So this good, bad here, benefiting others and benefiting self, there should be no conflict. Because Shankarisita in his book, The Bodhisattva Ideal, Phusatao or Bodhidao Bồ Tát, he said that a bodhisattva ideal doesn't represent altruism as opposed to individualism. There's no conflict, opposite between altruism, no self, and individualism, or saving others as opposed to saving oneself. There's no conflict. It's not like you have to make a decision between helping yourself or helping others. It synthesizes opposites. It combines the two, and it makes something great out of it, the two. Helping others and also helping oneself, compassion and wisdom all together. So there is no conflict, there is no duality. When we have achieved this level of a bodhisattva ideal we have in our hearts when we are practicing it, benefiting ourselves is the same as benefiting others. For example, if you practice meditations, you practice cultivate merits and that, and you yourself have merits, and you yourself feel very wonderful, positive, strong, and you're very generous, that is going to help others, right? When you go out into the society, you are going to benefit others, and others will benefit from your giving. So when you yourself are positive, others will benefit from that positivity too. Although when you practice positivity, you do not have the intention to be positive for yourself, but you practice just to cultivate, to generate that positivity. But as a result, when you walk into a room, other people can feel your friendliness, can feel your positivity, and they can be encouraged, and therefore they benefit from it. And benefiting others is the same as benefiting ourselves. For example, if we help others to become more harmonious and that they collaborate, we are putting in our efforts to do a lot of work, and we didn't ask others to do the work. And when things come out and they benefit from it, they see our hard work contributions, and they are motivated to do so. And when the environment is harmonious, it is better for us too, because we can practice, we can live our lives and are able to make progress easily. Does it make sense? So benefiting others is the same as benefiting ourselves, and benefiting ourselves is the same as benefiting others. So in this bodhisattva ideal, there is no conflict. And so the good and bad here is, although good is to benefit others, bad is to benefit ourselves. But and that is one way of looking at it. Of course, the more developed way of looking at it is there is no conflict. There is no boundary between others and ourselves. Does that make sense?
Is the intention what counts?
Yeah, it's the intention. But the intention is not like, okay, I'm going to benefit myself so that others can benefit, or I'm going to benefit others because I know I'm going to benefit from it. But the bodhisattva ideal is, it's just seamless. It's just the right thing to do. There's no other way that would make more sense. And so you just do it because, yeah, it's your intention, but it's just a natural intention that comes out of your compassion, your wisdom. We're not there yet. Sometimes we do have that boundary, that duality. And so we should at least understand the different facets of goodness and the different angles, facets of bad. So that it helps us to make that distinction so that we can avoid mistakes. Because if we don't make that distinction, we ourselves can make the mistakes. So in Master Zhong Feng in Lao Fan's 4 lessons, he said that there are many types of goodness. One is, of course, there's here he's finding good and bad, right? And there is good in benefiting ourselves, and there's also good in benefiting others. And of course, benefiting ourselves is just on the appearance, and like you mentioned, Alex, is our intention is for self-benefiting, then that is considered bad. But on the other hand, if the sole intention of benefiting others, and that's is good. And there's also public and there's private. Public goodness and private goodness. Public goodness is when you do something and you want everybody to know about it because you like the compliments, you like the fame, you like the recognition. So that's public. Private is that you do so without trying to make a big sting out of it. You do so because it's the right thing to do and you are not looking for any kind of recognition. And of course, there's also real kind of goodness and false kind of goodness. Real kind is it comes from the heart, just like Sumana. It came from his heart when he made offerings to the Buddha. It was not out of fear. It was not like because he saw somebody making offerings, say, hey, I gotta do something, otherwise I'm gonna look bad. That did not occur in his mind. So of course, false goodness is you're doing because other people are doing it, you have no idea why, and because you don't want to feel bad, so you just follow the crowd. And real goodness is when you do something good and you don't expect a return. You're not seeking karmic rewards. And false is you do goodness other than to benefit others, right? So he named a few types of goodness here. One is real, where it comes from the heart and there's no strings attached, and the end result is it benefits others. False goodness is you do it just because you're just following the crowd and you expect a return, you want that karmic reward, and at the end it's just about self-benefiting. There's also honest type of goodness, where honest is where it comes from your heart and it's aspiring and it's dignified. Whereas crooked kind of goodness is on the surface it appears that that person who's doing good is a good person, but that person is doing goodness out of fear, and sages call them thieves of virtue. And there's also kind of hidden kind of goodness, and that cannot be seen publicly, and one is not seeking fame, and it is more reliable. And visible is where it can be seen publicly and one's seeking recognitions and unreliable. The reason it's not reliable because this is a yin-yang mentality, principles. The yin-yang, yin is something that's hidden. Yang is like something that is visible. So you look at the tree. If the tree has a strong foundation, you see the tree, the taller it grows, the bigger the roots, the bigger the foundation for it to sustain. Otherwise, the wind blows through and it will flip over. So the reason that hidden is more reliable is because you want the base to be reliable. The foundation of your house too is hidden. You cannot see it. When you first look at the house, what do you see? The roof. You may see the pillars and you may see the walls, but you don't usually see the foundation. And even if it's raised, you only see a small portion of it. There's a new architecture for high-rise buildings in New York. They can build very tall and slender buildings, right? So they have to dig very deep to compensate for the weight and the environmental effects. So same thing, it is reliable to have hidden goodness, and it is unreliable to have visible goodness. So when we do something good and we want other people to know about it, then that is visible goodness, and it is unreliable because through fame and fortune that we will deplete. We are asking for karmic rewards, and therefore it comes to fruition and we enjoy it and then it's all gone. Whereas it's visible where it's gaining strength over time, if you will. I mean, it's not like it's time dependent, but it comes from your heart. It comes from the inner of yourself, and it's more reliable. Does it make sense? Why hidden is more reliable and visible is not, right? I mean, you look at a car, you go buy a car, you just don't look at the paint and say, oh, paint looks good, I'm gonna buy it. Or you have to check out the engines, the inside, and how that's more reliable, right? Even if the paint is chipped, but the engine is solid, that's what you want. You want that rather than a nicely painted car, but the engine is not gonna last very long. So same thing, when we cultivate merits, we should focus more on the hidden merit, the hidden goodness, than the visible goodness. Does it make sense? And that's also partial goodness, where it's half-hearted sincerity. A person gives with calculations, whereas whole is true and sincere heart. It comes from true and sincere heart. And one gives freely without calculating. Okay, if I'm going to give this much, I should expect this much in return. Or if I give to this party is going to support me, and then I can use that support to overcome this party, and so forth. And so that is partial when a person has calculating mind to when that person gives. Whereas whole heart, whole giving, goodness is you make offering because it's the right thing to do. That person deserves respect, and when you give offering to like a masters, a venerable masters, and other people see that, you say, oh, that person is a good person, but he or she is respecting a venerable, so that venerable must be worth something, right? That venerable must be of something deserving, and so that would motivate others to be curious and to learn more about it. And when we give because we see that person suffering, we want to alleviate the suffering of others. It's just the right thing to do in the cold day. You take out your jacket and you just let that homeless person have the jacket because it's just so cold, because you have another jacket in the car, or you can easily go buy one. And so the giving of the jacket is just a natural thing to do, and that's whole goodness. Because it's just the right thing to do, because that person needs that jacket more than you do, right? You give a few dollars because to that person, a few dollars means a lot, could save his life if he can use it to buy food. Whereas for us, our stomach is full, we're warm, so that few dollars that we lost, it doesn't mean much, right? It's not a big loss. Yes. So whole and partial, right? Visible and hidden, crooked and honest, false and real. We should be able to distinguish the different types of goodness. And this is to check our mind too. Sometimes when we give, if we find that there is a calculating part in us when we give, then we're only cultivating half of it, only doing half or partial goodness. All right. And if we give because we know that somebody's looking, that we're gonna get the compliments, we're gonna get recognition later, and we do goodness, then that is visible. And if we're doing goodness because we want to follow the crowds, we don't want to be criticized, we're not giving, then that's crooked, right? And false is when we give because we are seeking a return. We want to benefit ourselves, so that's false goodness. So this is just helps us to remind ourselves that when we do a merit cultivation, that we should be able to understand the different types, and when we know to cultivate the real, the honest, the hidden, and the whole goodness, then it helps us with our morality. It helps us with precept observation. And with morality, when we are consistently doing goodness, honest, hidden, and whole, and real, then the more that we do, we become consistent. And so our personality will be consistent too. Otherwise, we'll be flipping between real and false. For example, we benefiting others. Should I give to benefit others? But I need it too, and so there will be a struggle. If we don't have a clear differentiation and we're not consistent within ourselves, then we are going to have conflict, internal conflict. and we'll be pulled between helping others and helping ourselves. And that consistency is very important when we practice meditation, right? When our personality is consistent, we have no internal conflicts, and that's gonna help us to absorb in meditation, because when we sit in meditation, we don't rise to wandering false thoughts of our actions, right? We keep thinking about the struggle between helping ourselves and helping others. So when you cultivate merits, it impacts your meditation practice. When you practice meditation, it also impacts your merit cultivation. How do they support one another? Well, you see that the regular path, the traditional way of cultivation is morality, precept, meditation, wisdom. These two kind of go together, but morality is more worldly, and precept is more of leading more to transcendental. And when we have a strong foundation of precept, it helps with meditation, and therefore it helps with wisdom. So how do they reinforce each other? Well, a moral person will do skillful deeds, right? 善业, skillful deeds, 庭业, to help others, and they bring true benefits. So by doing so, a moral person, even though that person may not be practicing Buddhism to say, I'm observing precepts, essentially he or she is observing the precepts. And if that person leans towards meditation, spirituality, then that person is going to have a smoother time in practicing meditation. And so you can see, right, a good person's doing good deeds, he's going to feel at ease with himself. And that's going to help him to calm down any anxieties, any wandering thoughts, because there's no internal conflict. And that helps him with his meditation. And the more that he is meditative, the more that he's going to continue to be consistent with his personality, right? If he is already consistent in doing good deeds, then he's going to continue to do so. And so meditation allows us to recognize our faults, the thoughts in us, the faulty thoughts, and eliminate them before they grow. For example, without meditation, it is very difficult for us to recognize our thoughts. Just like you're in a crowd. Imagine you're and you're looking at a crowd only from above. You're looking at their heads. You don't know who's who because you only see their heads. But imagine that everybody sits down and then only one person stands up. Then you can recognize that person clearly, who that person is. At least you'll be able to identify that person. So similarly, when we practice meditation, when we calm down all our wandering thoughts, we can easily detect what we want to look for. Does that make sense? When your mind is calm, you can easily see what lies at the bottom. It's like the surface of the water. When the water is calm and clear, you can easily see the dirt, the rocks down below. But if it's disturbed, and it's very difficult to see, you cannot identify exactly what it is. So when we practice meditation, that's what we're doing is we don't sit there and enjoy the meditative bliss, but we investigate the mind. Right? We reinforce positivity, compassion, loving kindness, right? The positivity to help us gain strength, but at the same time, we are investigating our faults. So one side is you are reinforcing your positivity. The other side is you investigate to look for the faults and the weaknesses to either eliminate them or to convert them into strength. When you eliminate them, you eliminate all the negativity, the greed, the jealousy. You recognize that the anger, somebody at work has said something very clever, but in a way to criticize you in front of your peers. and you weren't able to do anything at that time. And so it caused jealousy. But now you look at it, you investigate, when you sit in meditation, you investigate that, you begin to understand why you were so angry. And you realize that there was some egoistic attachment to it. That was not healthy. But at that moment, with your emotional stirred up, that it was not difficult, it was not easy to detect. But when you sit in meditation, you can detect why you were angry and the cause of that anger. Right? So we don't have meditative mind without emotional disturbance. It is difficult to eliminate unhealthy craving. For example, if you see this nice car driving down the street, your favorite car, and then in your mind you cause rise to a thought, I love that color, I'm gonna own that car someday. So and then you walk away. With a meditative mind, you can stop that right away, because what you have done may seem very, very insignificant, but that thought you have cultivated, you have planted a seed of craving, right? And if a seed of craving exists and the conditions exist, it will grow. So in other words, if you don't have the meditative ability to stop that, that's going to continue to grow. You're nurturing that craving, and eventually it's gonna, someday you're gonna be pushed to spend money to buy that. You cannot control yourself, but you want to go out and buy to have it. But if you have meditation, you stop it right away, say that was not proper. That craving was not proper, and you will be able to stop that craving. Right? So without meditative mind, you won't be able to recognize even the very subtle thoughts that you like something, and it may seem insignificant, but it could turn to neurotic craving. Neurotic craving is you desire for something not because you need it, but to satisfy some other needs. For example, the people who eat, this neurotic craving in food. It's not like they're hungry, but they eat because it makes them feel happy. They keep munching. They like to munch, they like chocolate. They like the sweetness. And of course, as a result of that, it's just too much sweet in the body. It's not good. It's unhealthy. But that's neurotic craving, because that person cannot stop eating. It's not that person is hungry, or it's not that person has just finished a dinner that he or she wants some sweets to complement the meal. But neurotic craving is where you have uncontrolled, you don't have any control of stopping that craving. So that's neurotic craving. So similarly, if a little bit that we don't stop, I like the color of the car, and then I'm gonna own that someday. So you can see how it continues to build and becomes neurotic, where you say, I gotta have that car, and if it means I'm gonna take out another loan and it's gonna ruin my credit, I gotta have that car. So that's neurotic craving, right? And of course, this is important because how we construct our mind is going to influence our path. In the Nikaya Sutras, it's called the Vahavitaka Sutra, where it really means two sorts of thinking. And here the Buddha says that a person or a monk keeps thinking about it, whatever that is, becomes the inclination of his awareness, meaning he's going to be more aware of that. And then his mind is going to be bent by that thinking. So if he's thinking about sensuality, meaning desire, craving, and things like that, if he keeps thinking about that object of his desire, then his mind's going to bend towards that desire, and to a point where it's going to become uncontrollable. So sensuality, ill will, harmfulness, if he keeps thinking about those and he's abandoning the positive side of it, then he's going to his mind's going to be inclined toward. It becomes a habit. It becomes unstoppable. People who have neurotic craving is because they cannot control themselves. And it's because it has come to a point where that pattern has been established. You look at the plane, the grass, right? It looks evened. And you continue to walk that path. At the beginning, you step on the grass, it will spring back. But you keep walking that path, you will form a path where it becomes visible. Same thing, whenever we cause rise to a certain thought, we are walking that path. And if we continue to walk that path, it becomes a pattern where it is so difficult to overcome. You following me? Right? So the Buddha here is warning us that the more that we think about the negativity like sensuality, ill will, and harmfulness, then the more our mind's going to bend towards that, and we're not going to be able to pull ourselves back. I'm not talking about, when I talk about sensuality, I'm not talking about you need a shirt and you go out and sure you go shopping. I'm not saying don't go shopping, don't go buy anything. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about here is avoiding getting to a point of neurotic craving, right? Food can be harmless. Everybody eats. But if we don't have control of ourselves and we allow it to turn to neurotic craving, then it can be very dangerous, right? Eating a lot of food, you gain weight, you have diabetes, it leads to a whole bunch of health issues. So, but to go out and buy a chocolate bar is not a big deal. But we should have awareness that when we allow sensuality to take place, we are bending our mind towards that direction. Does it make sense? All right?
Yes. How do you overcome? Sometimes this has been for years. The path is already set. How do you overcome that?
So the Buddha, good question. So the Buddha says here, if the monks, for example, let's take an example. If the monks keeps thinking about ill will and abandoning the thinking of non-ill will, then his mind is going to bend towards the ill will. So to answer the question, the Buddha says here, think the other way. With sensuality, think of renunciation. So instead of thinking about craving for ourselves, we can change it to say to have the desire to help others, to become less self-centered. Right? You have to change the direction. Don't continue to take that path, but take the other path. Does it make sense? So we reduce little by little. You can try to regrow that path with grass so it doesn't form a pattern anymore. But the Buddha is saying here is think the other way. For ill will, think about non-ill will. For harmfulness, think about harmlessness to counteract it. So we know that we have neurotic craving, then we first should recognize that we have neurotic craving and that it is something we want to overcome, right? We first have to recognize the issue and have the ability to to want to overcome it. Does it make sense? If you don't recognize that and you don't want to put in the efforts to overcome it, then you're not renunciating it. You're not moving away from it. You're right? In other words, you don't want to change. So it's not that it's difficult. It's just that do we want to change? Are we serious? And it's going to be difficult at first because, like you said, Alex, we already formed a pattern. If we can cause rise to in our heart, and when we have reverence for the Buddha, we say, empower me to overcome my weakness. Empower me so that I can gain the strength to overcome this weakness, and I want to. And of course, after you've done that, you're gonna likely to go back to your behavior, and that's okay because you have planted a different seed already, right? You are reducing its momentum already, and therefore, it's not like before. You have changed yourself. You have changed the intrinsic nature of yourself. You have changed the substance of yourself. You might not recognize it, but you have changed it. And what's going to happen is you start to change your subconsciousness, and it's going to appear maybe in your dreams. You're going to see that struggle. Before, you did not recognize the struggle. You were rolling downhill and you were going to hit the bottom. But now you can see the struggle. It starts to change your substance, your subconsciousness. And it could appear in your dreams, and you will at first will feel very uneasy, right? I say, I know I'm doing this, but I know I'm not, I shouldn't be doing this. See, that struggle is good, it's healthy. And perhaps you may see in your dreams that you are struggling, trying to run uphill or something like that, where you can never get uphill. Or you're trying to run away from something, but you cannot run away from it. And so it may seem like a nightmare, but what's happening is you are changing your subconsciousness, and it's starting to surface, right? You're starting to recognize the ugliness of the issue, and it's going to rise up. Just like when we walk outside with our clothes in a very dusty, windy environment, our clothes are going to get dirty. And you're trying to wash your clothes. Of course, what's going to happen? All the dirt's going to come out. The water's going to be ugly, right? It's going to be brownish. It's going to be dirty water. But we shouldn't be afraid to see dirty water. But we should continue to wash the clothes so that eventually we will have clean water. So same thing when we have the difficulties we want to overcome, and we know it's so difficult to overcome. We have shortcomings, and we know it's not easy. And let's say you have a certain desire for new car, new clothes, whatever it is, and you cannot stop yourself from doing so. Cannot stop yourself from going shopping. Cannot stop yourself from, like, you play games. Some people play games. They cannot stop themselves from playing game because they have joy, and for them to stop, it's just so agonizing, suffering, painful. So the first is to recognize that, and at the beginning, it's going to be a struggle to overcome. But if he continues to tell himself, I need to overcome this, and I want to overcome this, and he will gain strength, right? Just like washing your clothes. At the beginning, the first wash, it's going to be very dirty. But you don't stop there. You continue to add clean water to continue to wash your clothes. When you add clean water, is when you add the proper thoughts. This is not proper. This is proper. And I should focus on proper. And when you do that, you are adding pure, clean water to help wash away all the dirt, right? So we should not be afraid when things feel uneasy, when we feel uncomfortable, that we are changing ourselves, we are changing our substance, we're changing our subconsciousness. So what the Buddha is telling here is, if you're thinking about something, your mind's going to lean towards that, and it's going to become a pattern. And if you don't want to follow that pattern, then create a new pattern by thinking about it, right? So that's what the Buddha is talking about here. So to move away from sensuality, ill will, and harmfulness. And when the mind is leaning towards renunciation, non-ill will, and harmlessness, then the body is going to be unmuddled, mindful, and be at ease, undisturbed. And so in this sutra, the Buddha was recalling his experience, how to overcome ill will, harmfulness, and sensuality. And at the end, it allowed him to feel very calm and unaroused, concentrated. And that's how he was able to enter meditation. So this sutra is a recollection of the Buddha's experience. He was recounting his experience in how he achieved enlightenment. So withdrawn from sensuality, from unskillful mental qualities, I enter and remained in the first jhana, right? Chu Chan Ding, right? Soting. So that's the first level of jhana. Unskillful mental qualities, sensualities, all eliminated. He entered the first jhana. And that allows him to feel rapture and pleasure. That's the effect of the first jhana. And he continued to do that. His second jhana, third jhana, and eventually abandoning of pleasure and pain, he entered the fourth jhana, where there is no elations, no distress, purity of equanimity and mindfulness. Equanimity here will naturally surface when one has let go of worldly suffering and joy, spiritually speaking. When we say letting go, we don't mean to let go of our responsibilities, but to let go spiritually. For example, in the pursuit of liberations and enlightenment, one does not forget about compassion and loving kindness towards others. So that's in a lecture last night that Mr. Chen reminded us. Right? He said that in the pursuit of enlightenment and liberation for ourselves, we don't forget about compassion and loving kindness towards others. If you really love yourself, you should not love yourself. Think about it for a moment. See if it makes sense to you. If you truly love yourself, you should not love yourself. What do you think is meant by that, Alex? Any idea? How is it that by not loving ourselves, that we are loving ourselves? We are being kind to ourselves. If you look from the worldly perspective, it is difficult to see. But you look at it from the Buddhist perspective, it's easy to understand why.
Detachment.
Yeah, right, attachment, egoistic attachment, correct. If you love yourself, you are increasing your ego. You are increasing your self-centeredness. You are increasing your, in other words, selfishness. And in the Fourth Noble Truth, the cause of suffering is delusion, is selfishness. If you have selfishness, whatever that you do, suffering will follow. So if you truly love yourself, you don't want suffering for yourself. So if you truly love yourself, you don't want to increase that egoistic view. You don't want to increase your selfishness, your self-centeredness. And that is why if you truly love yourself, you should not pamper yourself. You should not love yourself. You should not treat yourself so well that it increases your arrogance, your egoism. Does it make sense? Yeah, so correct, Alex. That's attachment is what it's going to bring suffering to us. It seems like, it's like when you see like, oh, I see that red sports car, I'm going to own it someday. And if you truly have one day when it comes true, your dream comes true, where you own that red sport car, you may feel happy, but it also brings suffering, because if the more that you love something, it's going to degrade over time. If somebody scratches your car, it's going to be very painful, right? But I'm here, I'm not saying don't own anything. I'm not saying that. When we're saying letting go, we're talking about spiritually speaking, to let go of things, right? So when we stop the pursuit of joy, we eliminate selfishness, we stop suffering. Then that means we truly love ourselves, right? When we stop our selfishness, we are loving ourselves. We are being kind to ourselves, because we stop suffering for ourselves, right? In the word there, there's joy and suffering. The worldly joy and suffering are relative, because there is suffering in joy, and there is joy in suffering. That's why it's relative, and it's cyclic. They go in circles. After suffering, there's joy. After there's joy, there's suffering to replace it. So in suffering, there's joy. From joy arises suffering. For example, like, let's say a woman adopting a puppy, a cute little puppy, right? To her, it's very joyful because now she has a very cute little puppy who is well trained and who is really her best friend. Right? So it brings a lot of joy in adopting and nurturing that puppy. So it brings her joy. But one day, unfortunately, the dog gets lost. It has run away. And so she feels very depressed that she has lost her best friend. So that joy that she has, the greater joy now, the equivalent amount of suffering she's encountering because of the joy. The whole week, she's been depressed, thinking about her lost dog, just like losing a family member. A week later, somebody knocks on the door and say, "Is this your dog, ma'am?" She is now super happy, right? All her misery is now gone. It's replaced by joy. Because of her misery this much, it turns around and she has gained that much joy. But if it was every day, the dog's coming in and out, there's a lot of disparity between joy and suffering, right? So she feels normal. But if the dog had never entered her life in the first place, where she never met the dog, she never adopted the dog, she would not have encountered the joy of having the dog, nor the misery of losing the dog, right? So that's why worldly joy is relative and cyclic. It goes in cycle. When you have joy, there's a likelihood, a good chance that you're going to see misery. Not the same amount, but even could be more. This world is relative. Joy and suffering are relative. A person who practices meditation, spirituality understands that there is relativity in joy and suffering, and so he overcomes or she overcomes that relativity to maintain equanimity, 舍,慈悲喜舍, the equanimity, where you let go of the pursuit of joy. In that pursuit, there is self-centeredness, because we want to gain something. And according to Four Noble Truths, 是圣谛, right? Four Noble Truths, the cause of suffering is selfishness. So in other words, whatever that we do, if we have self-centeredness in it, suffering will follow. Other way around, looking at it, if we encounter suffering, then we know that we have done something with self-centeredness in mind, right? So the experience of the fourth jhana, meaning abandoning of pleasure and pain and achieving equanimity and mindfulness, it is still relative too, although it's less conditional. Less conditional meaning, the more conditional meaning you require a lot. You require a lot to be happy. Some people can be happy when they see somebody smiling at them. Some people can only be happy if they are presented with a present. Some people are only happy if their spouse loves them unconditionally, right? Meaning that person requires more conditions to become happy. But if you practice meditation and you achieve this equanimity, mindfulness, then it requires very little to be happy. If you wake up in the morning, Sunday morning, and you see the sunlight shining through your windows, the birds chirping, it's enough to make you happy. It requires fewer conditions to be happy. And so when you practice meditations, you are requiring less and less of the condition to make you happy. In other words, you yourself are very strong inside already. Some people have to be pampered in order to be happy. Some people have to have a lot of recognition and attention in order to be happy, because that person is weak inside. and it needs external conditions to compensate for it. But a person who is strong requires very little to be happy. Does it make sense? Right? So when we practice meditation, and it allows us to be happy. But being happy is just half of the story. The other half of the story is to build a strong foundation. And that's what we've been talking about, is the foundation of merits. 修福, 福报. Where the foundation of merit allows us to have a strong foundation, to have a strong development. And of course, that foundation is what? It's reverence for the Buddha. 尊敬佛陀. Right? Reverence for the Buddha is the foundation of all merits. Because if we don't have that reverence for the Buddha, then whatever good deeds that we do on top of it, they're not stable. They will lead to selfishness. They will lead to self-centeredness. They will lead to wanting to seek fame and fortune and not spirituality. Does it make sense? Right? So the normal path is morality, precepts, meditation, and wisdom. So the threefold study, right? 戒定慧. Morality, precepts, meditation, and wisdom. So what are the differences? Why do we have to go through that stage in order to get to where we, to ultimate goal of unconditionality or enlightenment? Well, in observing precepts, 持戒, 止giới, is an internal reflection to distinguish between wrong and right, skillful and skillful. Right? When we practice, when we observe the precepts, we know what's wrong, what's right. That's why we observe the precepts. And we can observe the precepts because we know what's wrong, what's right, what's unskillful and skillful. But if we stop there, it's not enough, because there's still a little bit of bias. Because what's good to you may not be good to others. What's good to others may not be favorable to you. So there's still bias. That's why it's not good enough. At least it allows us to become a good person, but it's not good enough. The next level is meditation, and that is internal reflection, and it's all skillful. Remember, right? The Buddha recounted his experience of moving away from sensuality, ill will, and harmfulness, and it allows him to feel very calm, concentrated, and to eventually enter jhana, 禅定, 定人, right? So same thing, when you're in 禅定, you're in meditation, there is no unskillfulness. If you have any kind of negativity, you won't be able to enter meditation. It will disturb you. So when you enter this stage, you are going, essentially, it's all skillful. You're no longer talking about good or bad anymore. You're good. You have to be in a very positive state of mind in order to enter meditation. Just like the Buddha says. So the first is to recognize what's wrong and what's right, and then you commit yourself to doing skillful deeds, what's right. The next is, now you're in a state where you are all skillful. All you're thinking is positive. You're all positive, very energetic. But the only difference now is between disturbed and undisturbed mind. Right? Now when you talk about meditation, it's about maintaining that stillness so you won't be disturbed. Right? So you're no longer talking about good or bad. You're now talking about 动 or 不动. Right? 先动 or 先不动, or disturbance or non-disturbance. Right? In the meditation level, you're no longer talking about good or bad, because it's all good, it's all positive. But it's still not good enough, because what you're doing is you're suppressing your undesired emotions. When we say all positive, it's just that because all the negatives are being suppressed. You're not allowing the negatives to surface. And therefore you are encountering all the positives. But it doesn't mean you have reached the goal. It's still not good enough. So that's meditation. Does it make sense? Right? So that's not good enough. The next level is wisdom, 智慧, trí tuệ. And you no longer, when you talk about wisdom, you no longer talk about disturbance or non-disturbance. 动 or 不动, you're no longer talking about disturbance anymore, mental disturbance, but you're talking about delusions and awakening. 觉悟 and 迷惑. Right? You're not talking about good or bad anymore. It's can you see that disturbance and non-disturbance, they're above skillfulness and unskillfulness, bad, good, shan and bad and good. And wisdom between delusions and awakening is beyond disturbance and non-disturbance. Because something that's good, for example, is really delusional. When you do something good, you create karma. You're creating karma for a future life. In Buddhism, that's delusional because you are still within the realm of the cycle of life and death. So even though it's good, but it's delusional still. There's no enlightenment in it. Does it make sense? So even though it's good, but it's not good enough. Even though it's skillful, but it's not good enough because it's still delusional. There's still attachment of the ego when you do good deeds. In order to destroy, to be all suffering, because that good deeds will lead to good karmic rewards, 福报, 福报. But when you have this body, this life, you cannot escape old age, illness, and death. And that's why it's delusional, because you continue to be wrapped up in that cycle of life and death. But enlightenment is to go outside of that, to destroy all unhealthy craving and afflictions at the root. So observing the precepts is like cutting the grass, making your backyard very beautiful. You may not see the weeds because you cut everything down level. Meditation is you put cement on it. Now you don't have any grass in it. You don't see any grass, you see a very clean surface, right? Because it's all cement. But you're suppressing your grass. But over time, the cement cracks. And what do you see? Weeds starts coming to grow up. So that's meditation. It temporarily suppresses your negative emotions, your afflictions. But as soon as you lose your meditative state of mind, your afflictions will arise again. Just like the cement start breaking up over time, the earth shifting, the cement's breaking over time, contractions and expansion, it creates cracks, and now the weeds can grow through. Delusion causes suffering because that person doesn't know what the causes of the dissatisfaction, the suffering, and doesn't know the ways to end the suffering. Meditation can only suppress the suffering. You're essentially numbing your senses when you enter meditation. Wisdom, prajna, resolves suffering and dissatisfaction. So having wisdom doesn't mean everything will be smooth, but having wisdom, there's pain but no suffering. So the example that Mr. Chen gave in his lecture was about tooth removal. Tooth removal could be from a decay. You eat something wrong, right? Now you have 2 days. Your tooth has to be removed. The other is you get to receive a punch on your jaw and your teeth are falling out. Or the other one is from dental extraction. So tooth decay, you're unaware of yourself. You're doing harm to yourself without being without awareness. And when you get punched in the jaw and you lose your teeth, you can be angry, and you're gonna fight back. And when you go to a dental office and you get your tooth removed, it's painful during the process, but you don't get angry at the dentist, right? You don't punch the dentist in the face for pulling out your tooth because you're there to have your tooth removed. But not only do you not feel angry, but you're going to pay him to inflict pain on your jaw. And you don't feel angry because you understand the cause of the pain. The cause of the pain because you have toothache, and then he's going to have to remove it. And so you don't get angry at the dentist for removing your tooth. And so that's wisdom, is when we have wisdom, we don't feel the pain, but we have the strength to endure it because we see clearly the cause of that pain. Does it make sense? And so you can use meditation to suppress it, like somebody punching you in a jaw, and somebody has broken a few teeth of yours, and you can use, you can force yourself to not be angry, but you're just forcing yourself not to be angry. Whereas your tooth is being removed by a dentist, and you don't get angry because you understand why you're there to make things better. When you remove the tooth, your whole jaw will be safe from decay. Right? All your other teeth will not be affected, and you will have better set of teeth. Does it make sense? So wisdom is what allows you to resolve suffering. You may have pain in a way, along the way, but there's no suffering. So when we study Buddhism, we should not expect our life to be trouble-free. No more issues. No, that's not what studying Buddhism is. We have our own karma. Things will come to fruition. It will impact us. People will slander us, will criticize us. We will feel unhappy and so forth. We will have car breakdown. We will have bad things that may happen to us. But we don't have suffering. Does it make sense? So that's the value of studying Buddhism, is there is no suffering. There may be pain, but it's really insignificant because you have more ability to overcome that pain. Therefore, there is no suffering. Right? But with delusion, there is pain and suffering. Right? You get a punch in the jaw because you don't know, and so you get angry. But if your tooth is being removed because you're there for the reason, because it makes you healthier, then you will be happy. You're more than happy to have that tooth removed. Right? So the practice, precepts, meditations, and wisdom, we need all three of them. But we cannot stop at just precepts, being a good person. We have to practice meditation to allow us to see clearly what's wrong, what's right, and to have the wisdom to eliminate a suffering, to understand the conditions. We understand Yuan Qi Fa. We understand the conditions why things happened. Okay. Well, I have a few more things to go over, but time has come to an end, and we'll pick up this time. Next time I will talk about ways to overcome difficulties and sufferings. Why is it that cultivating merits can help us to overcome suffering? How is it that can give us the strength? And the foundation of that is reverence, 尊敬佛陀, reverence for the Buddha. Why is that important? Right? It has helped us. It's the foundation of all. Anything that you build on top of that, any goodness you build on top of that, is not reliable. Okay. All right, any other comments before we end? All right. So we'll pick up this again next time when we meet in a couple of weeks. Today's the 6th, so it'll be the 20th, December 20th when we meet again. All right, if there are no other comments, we will do merit dedications. If you could please join your palms. Together we recite. May the merits and virtues accrued today adorn the Buddha Pure Lands, repay 4 types of kindness above, and aid those suffering in the paths below. May those who see and hear of this bring forth the result for the body-mind. When this retribution body is complete, together we shall meet in the land of ultimate bliss. If you could please rise and we bow to the Buddha 3 times to show our respect. First bow, second bow, and third bow. Amida Society. Please stay back for lunch.